A Horse Called Willing. Chapter 11. Letters to the Detweilers. There had been no rain for a week. Because they didn't have full-scale irrigation equipment, Mom and the boys watered the berry patch to keep it from drying up. Soon the berries grew smaller. The wholesale truck stopped coming because only large berries were wanted at the city market. "That means we get to can a lot of little berries ourselves this year," Mom said cheerfully. Joel groaned, though not too loudly. He really did want to be a willing worker, but he knew that now they would have to hull the berries as well as pick them. "When will we ever have time to get the pasture ready for Lady?" he complained. "It's just berries, berries, berries all the time, watering them, picking them, and now hulling and canning them." "The berry season will soon be past," Mom assured him. Joel was not so sure. Still, he began to work with a will. Maybe if they picked and hulled very fast, there would be time tonight to haul some gravel. As he moved up the berry row, he said to himself, "One good thing about being so busy, Mom hasn't said anything more about writing to the Detweilers. Maybe she'll forget all about it." There was no time for anything but berries that day, but the next day they were through by mid-afternoon because a lady bought all the little berries for making jam. They wouldn't have to hull those. Mom smiled at Joel. "I don't have to ask what you plan to do." Joel smiled back. "I know a place where there's some gravel on the creek bank. Shall we use the wagon or wheelbarrow to haul some of that to the groundhog burrow?" "The play wagon would be easier," Elam said as he headed for the woodshed where the wagon was kept. Joel glanced briefly into Pat's pen. It was empty now. Pat had been moved out to the barn. The once runty pig was now just as round and healthy as the other weaned pigs. "There's another job we're supposed to do," Elam remarked. "Mom said we ought to tear out that pig pen again." "Lady comes first!" cried Joel, grabbing the wagon and trotting over the lawn. Hauling loads of gravel uphill was back-breaking work. "This groundhog burrow must be really deep," Joel said after they had shoveled the third load into the hole. Elam grinned. "Maybe it's a bottomless pit. Maybe the hole goes right through the middle of the earth. Maybe this gravel we're shoveling in is coming out on the other side of the world, in China or somewhere." "Oh, you," Joel shot back. He took the wagon and headed for the creek. He was tired, but he wasn't going to admit it. Both boys were bent down, shoveling, when they heard someone calling, "What are you fellows doing?" Edwin Miller was standing on the opposite bank of the creek with a fishing rod balanced on his shoulder. The Millers were not close neighbors to the Stutzmans, but this same creek ran through their farm. Edwin had followed the creek all the way from his home. "Need any help?" he called. "Sure do," Elam called back. Edwin rolled up his pants legs and splashed across the creek. "Hauling gravel for your driveway or something?" "No," chuckled Elam. He grabbed the wagon handle and strained to pull it up the hill. Edwin dropped his fishing pole and pushed from behind. Elam puffed. "We're filling in a groundhog burrow so Lady doesn't hurt herself again." "I see," said Edwin, puffing too. This load was also quickly swallowed up by the hole. Edwin looked around. "We could use stones too, couldn't we, from that pile over there by the fence?" Joel agreed enthusiastically. "That's a good idea. Stones would fill it up faster, and they would be harder for the groundhog to move if he ever got it into his head to open the burrow again." They headed over to the fence with the wagon and were soon back with a load of stones. After several such loads, Elam said finally, "Now let's go and get Lady." Edwin looked at his watch. "I think I have time to stay until you've brought her out. I'd like to see her too. She will be glad to stretch her legs, I'd guess." Jim had been frolicking around the boys as they worked. Now he pricked up his ears and barked. Joel laughed. "You heard us talking about Lady, didn't you? Would you like to race with her again? Maybe you can win a race with her now. She won't be running very fast today." "She'd better take it easy at first," Elam agreed as they all hurried to the barn. Lady nickered happily as Elam untied her and led her outdoors. Her nostrils flared as she took in the fresh air. Once in the pasture, she reared up her head and began to run. It was not a full gallop, it wasn't even a fast trot, but Lady was running, and she was glad. So was Jim. So were Elam, Joel, and Edwin. Laughing and shouting, they ran after the horse and the dog, right down to the creek. The muscles that ached from hauling stones were quite forgotten. "I'd better go," Edwin said, rolling up his trousers legs again. He picked up his fishing pole and stepped into the water. "Goodbye, and thanks for your help," called Elam. "Good thing he came along when he did, or we'd still be hauling gravel," Joel remarked as they trudged uphill together. Supper was ready when they got to the house. After they started eating, Joel asked, "Mom, does Will go back to Bob Leyland as soon as we can use Lady again?" Mom hesitated. I don't know. I keep remembering how much Aaron Detweiler liked Will, and I can't bear to think of Will going for pet food." "What will you do? Wrap Will up in shiny paper, tie him with a fancy ribbon, and send him back to the Detweilers as a gift?" Elam teased. Mom answered, "Of course we couldn't do that, but well, I need time to think it over. And besides, we still need Will. Mr. Duval hasn't pronounced Lady roadworthy yet." Mum paused, then went on briskly. "Speaking of the Detweilers, that reminds me, Joel, there's a letter you need to write. Tonight." Joel groaned inwardly. "I should never have mentioned Will," he thought. "Now I'll have to write that dreadful letter." There was no way around it. After chores, Mom brought out paper and pens. Elam started writing with a flourish. Joel watched him enviously for a moment. Elam had it easy. He didn't need to write an apology. "Write about other things first," Mom prompted Joel gently. "Remember to thank them for the visit. At the end, say you're sorry." Joel nodded. He nibbled the end of his pencil. He wrote, "Dear Aaron and Alan, greetings across the miles. We have been busy picking berries. Are you making hay on your farm? Today we filled in the—" He stopped. No, he wasn't going to write to Alan about horses. Not a word. He erased that sentence again and wrote some more about berry picking. Then he started a new paragraph. "Thank you for visiting us. I am sorry I hit you at church that day." Joel looked up and asked, "How shall I end my letter?" "The usual way. You learned about letter writing at school, didn't you? Sincerely, or yours truly, should be fine," Mom replied. Joel thought it over. Yours truly did not sound right. He did not feel yours truly towards Alan Detweiler. Sincerely would be okay. He wrote, "Sincerely, Joel Stutzman." Joel looked across at Elam. He had finished too. "May I read your letter?" Joel asked. "Sure, if I may read yours." Joel shoved his across the table and took Elam's. He frowned as he read it. Elam, of course, had written all about Lady getting better and about filling up the groundhog hole. About Will, Elam had written, "Mom hasn't decided whether we will keep him or not. He's not much of a horse, and yet we have gotten sort of fond of him. He would be gentle enough for Joel to learn to drive." Joel scowled at his brother. "You didn't need to write all that." "Why not?" Elam asked innocently. "I had to write something. Aaron will be happy to read about Will." "That's right," Joel agreed. He hadn't been thinking about Aaron as he wrote, only about Alan. "Mom, are you going to proofread them too?" Mom read them and smiled at Joel. "I hope this helps you do as the scriptures say. You know, love your enemy." Joel said nothing. He wasn't sure he was any closer to loving Alan Detweiler. Chapter 12. A Heavy Load. The late-season strawberries were not finished bearing when the peas started. At first, Joel thought picking peas was fun. It was fun to rustle through the dewy vines, hunting for the fattest pods. It was fun to see how fast you could fill up a 6-quart or bushel basket. But after a few days, the fun wore off. Soon it was easier to complain than to pick peas. "It's so hard to find them," Joel grumbled to Elam one morning. Everything's green, the vines, the leaves, the pods. With strawberries, at least the ripe ones are a different color." "Uh-oh, getting tired already?" Elam asked. "We still have 5 rows to go." Joel groaned. 5 whole rows? Why, we'll never get done." "What's the rush? What is it you'd rather be doing?" Elam asked in his irritating way. "Helping make hay," Joel answered promptly. He sat back on his heels and stared longingly at the field beside the garden. 2 mowers were clickety-clacking through the sweet-smelling clover, laying it flat in straight swaths. Joe and Vernon Yoder were the privileged fellows driving the teams. "I wish I could do that," Joel said wistfully. "Even if we were farming, you wouldn't be old enough to drive a team and mower," Elam pointed out quickly. "Okay, but I could drive a team with a hay wagon," Joel shot back. The boys had been speaking so loudly that Mom heard them where she was picking late-bearing strawberries. "Maybe you will get a chance to drive a team this summer," she reminded Joel. "Remember, we told Harvey he may ask for help if he needs it." "Not much chance that he'll need help with 4 boys of his own," Joel mumbled. Suddenly Elam jumped up. "There goes the mailman! My turn to get the mail!" He dashed across the garden, taking great leaps across the rows of vegetables. Joel wailed after him, "No, it's my turn! You fetched the mail 2 days in a row! Come back, Elam!" Elam appeared not to hear him and kept right on going. Joel was almost in tears. "Mom, it really is my turn. Elam got the mail on Monday and Tuesday, remember? Yesterday and today are my days." Mom's eyes followed Elam, who by this time was halfway out the lane. "I guess you're right, but Elam didn't seem to remember that. Well, Joel, I'll tell Elam that it will be your turn tomorrow and Monday." "Okay," said Joel grumpily. He found himself wanting to shout angrily at Elam when he came back with the mail. Mom guessed his feelings. "Joel, you must not be angry at Elam. I will remind him, and you stay quiet." "Okay," said Joel again. He contented himself with glowering at Elam while Mom rebuked him. Elam ducked his head. "I forgot that you get 2 days." "Apologize," came Mom's firm reminder. "I'm sorry," said Elam, none too willingly. Mom was still looking at him. "Remember, an apology isn't real unless we mean it." "Yes, Mom," Elam muttered. Then he held up an envelope. "See? There's a letter for me and Joel from the Detweiler boys." Joel jumped up excitedly. "There is? Let me see it." Elam held the letter out of his reach. "I didn't think you would want to see it. You sure weren't very enthusiastic about writing to Alan." "Getting a letter is more fun than writing one. Let me see it," Joel insisted. "Open the envelope," said Mom sternly. "Perhaps there are 2 letters, one from Aaron and one from Alan." Elam slit the envelope and peered inside. "Yep, there are 2 sheets. This one must be from Aaron." He held up a paper covered with a large, childish scrawl. "Let me have one," demanded Joel. There was an edge to their mother's voice. "Joel, remember to say please. And Elam, don't tease." Joel looked at her and began to laugh. "You made a poem, Mom." Mom smiled slightly. "So I did. Just don't forget what I'm saying." Elam handed Aaron's letter to Joel, and Joel began to read. "Dear Joel and Elam, thank you for your letters. We are all okay. How is Will? Do you cultivate the garden with him? I would like to see Will again. Dad doesn't let me drive our horses on the road, but if I had Will, I think I could drive him. Say hi to Will for me. From your friend, Aaron Detweiler." "His letter is all full of Will," chuckled Joel. "He just can't forget that horse. Too bad his dad won't buy him, because we won't need Will much longer anymore." Mom looked at him. "Oh, but maybe we do need him. Will would be just the horse for a young boy like you to learn to drive on the road. Here, do you want to read Alan's letter yet, too?" Joel took the letter. Alan's handwriting was neat, much neater than Joel's. Dear Joel and Elam, how are you? I am fine. Thanks for your letters. We had an interesting trip that time, but I was glad to come home again. We are busy with the hay. My sisters help too, so we have enough help. Joel looked up. Do they have sisters too? Mom replied, Oh yes, Mary is 17, I think, and Pollyanna and Peter are 20. Joel's brow wrinkled. Pollyanna and Peter? Are they twins? Yes, indeed, laughed Mom. Joel finished reading the letter. We got lots of strawberries this year. Yours truly, Alan Detweiler. Joel handed the letter to Mom and returned to his row of peas. Mom began picking a row near Joel. Alan didn't write a word about your apology, did he? She said quietly. Joel shook his head. I guess he forgot all about it. Maybe he did. He has probably forgiven you anyway, said Mom. That reminded Joel of what Mom had said to Elam a few minutes ago. An apology isn't real unless we mean it. Thoughtfully, Joel popped open a pod and scooped the fat peas into his mouth. Had his own apology to Alan been real? Had he really meant it when he said, I'm sorry, in his letter? Mom was talking again. There's something more important than the question of whether Alan has forgiven you, though, and that is, have you forgiven Alan? Joel was puzzled. Me? Forgive Alan? He didn't do anything to me. Well, he didn't actually hurt you by hitting you, but you were hurt by the way he acted towards you, Mom explained. I hope you have forgiven him and aren't holding a grudge. Holding a grudge is like walking around with a heavy load on your shoulders all the time. Joel thought that over. He wasn't sure why a grudge was like a heavy load, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized he still had a bad feeling toward Alan, and he also knew it didn't make him happy to feel that way. Forgiving someone is like unloading that heavy burden, Mom continued. Joel nodded. He knew he didn't want to go around lugging a big load. The best thing he could do would be to get rid of that grudge. Chapter 13. Storm. The Stutzmans were eating dinner on Saturday noon when a knock sounded on the door. Mom rose swiftly and opened it. Oh, hello, Dan. You're just in time for dinner. 17-year-old Dan Yoder shook his head smilingly. Fact is, I've had mine. We had an early dinner so we could start sooner on the hay that's ready. He coughed. Dad sent me to ask whether one of your boys could help drive the horse for the hay fork. Lizzie and Dorcas get tired of doing it all afternoon. Joel almost jumped from his chair. He wanted to shout, Mom, may I go? But he didn't say it. He knew Elam would be better help than he. Mom looked at her two eager boys, then back at Dan. Will Joel do? Elam and I should keep picking peas. Sure, Joel will do fine. He's almost as old as Lizzie, isn't he? Came Dan's answer. Now Joel did leap to his feet. Do you want me right away? You have time to finish eating. Dan chuckled. The girls can drive Frammy until you come. Dan left and Joel settled down again, but it didn't take him long to wolf down his piece of strawberry shortcake. As soon as Mom let him, he was off across the field to Harvey's. The first load of hay was just coming in from the field when Joel arrived. He watched as the Yoder's black team strained into the harness to pull the bulging load of loose hay up the embankment. Up near the barn door, the team stopped. Instantly, Paul set the hay fork. Its big steel jaws grabbed a mouthful of hay. Now it was time for Frammy to go into action. Frammy had once been part of a team, but the other horse had died of old age. Frammy herself was 16, but she was still quite capable of pulling the hay fork. Shall I take her down the first couple of times? Lizzie asked. Joel nodded. He needed to watch a little to be sure how it was done. Get up, Frammy, Lizzie said importantly, tightening her grip on the reins. Frammy knew exactly what to do. Her big feet went clop, clop, clop down the embankment. She was hitched to a rope stretching through a pulley under the peak of the roof, then down to the hayfork. As she went downhill, the hayfork rose and slid along the track right to the haymow. When Frammy stopped, the fork was tripped, dumping its load. Harvey and Vernon were in the mow, ready to fork and tramp the hay into place. Meanwhile, Lizzie and Frammy clopped back up the hill. The fork returned to the wagon, and Paul reset the fork. Then it was time to repeat the whole process. It looked easy, and it was, because Frammy was an old pro at it. Soon Joel was taking her reins with just as much confidence as Lizzie. But after a while it grew tiresome. There was never much time to rest, because the Yoders had 2 teams going in the field. As soon as an empty wagon left, a full one took its place. Up and down went Frammy. Up and down went Joel. He was glad to change off with Lizzie every now and then. The weather was muggy and very warm. Sweat poured down Joel's face. It seemed he could never get enough to drink. Dorcas and Ruth were kept busy refilling the water pail. Once they brought cold mint tea. That was even more refreshing than water. "Looks as if we might get a thunderstorm," Lizzie remarked, pointing to the southwest. Joel looked at the sky. Huge purple clouds were billowing up. "At least it will cool off then," he remarked. "Get up, Frammy." The wind began rising. At first it tugged playfully at loose wisps of hay, but soon gusts rocked the load of hay Joe was bringing in from the field. Joel clung to his straw hat. "This is going to be a storm!" he shouted above the roar of the wind. Harvey stuck his head out of the mow. "Better drive that load right in here. We can't unload in this wind anyhow, and it will probably start raining any minute," he called down to Joe. Joe guided his team into the upper part of the barn. Then he hurried out to Joel and Lizzie. "Here, I'll unhitch Frammy. You 2 had better run for the house." "What about Dan and Paul?" Lizzie asked anxiously. She had to shout to make herself heard. As he led Frammy away, Joe looked over his shoulder towards the field. "I think they're coming in." And so they were, even though there was only a little hay on the wagon. The hay loader rattled and bounced along behind. Joel felt the first big drops of rain splattering against his back. He and Lizzie sprinted to the house. The wind pushed so hard, Joel imagined if he flapped his arms he would fly away. Lizzie's mom smiled as the 2 children came panting indoors. "It's getting rough out there, isn't it?" Joel watched out the window as the Yoder men hurried to unhitch the teams and lead them to the stable. The rain came down harder and harder. Soon there was a stamping of feet as the men arrived, breathless, on the porch. "Soaked to the skin," declared Vernon, tugging at his wet shirt. "It's like running through a wall of water," Dan commented. Lightning flashed. The rumble of thunder blended with the roar of rain. Dad Yoder stood quietly by the window, watching the storm. Joel went over to stand near the stove. He shivered a little as he thought of Mom and Elam alone at home. After a while, Harvey suggested, "How about an early supper, Mom? We can eat while it rains like this, but we can't very well get the cows. Looks like the rain might keep on for a while yet." Elsie agreed. "Yes, we'd better have supper. That way chores won't be so late. After all, it's Saturday evening." She bustled about, preparing soup for supper. Lizzie and Dorcas set the table. "Guess I should be going home," Joel said uncomfortably. "Not in this rain," Paul told him with a chuckle. "Your Mom and Elam can get along without you for one meal, can't they?" Dan teased. "Of course," mumbled Joel. In a way, he wished he were at home. Yet, in spite of the storm, he felt safe and secure in this kitchen, almost safer than during thunderstorms at home. Joel guessed this was because of Dad Yoder. There was something about a dad calmly taking his place at the head of the table that made you feel safe. The rain was still pouring down when supper was over. Dad Yoder reached for the Bible. Maybe by the time we've had devotions the rain will let up." Joel felt warm and happy as he listened to Harvey Yoder's deep voice read the scripture and lead in prayer. He almost forgot about the storm. When they all rose from their knees, little Amos exclaimed, "It's morning again!" Everyone laughed. The 3-year-old was right, in a way. The kitchen was no longer so gloomy. Toward the northeast, the rain clouds could be seen scurrying away. "The rain has almost stopped," announced Joe, reaching for his hat. Joel got his hat, too. "I'd better go." He headed for the door, then remembered. "Thanks for supper." "You're very welcome," Elsie assured him. Joel decided to follow the road. That field looked pretty wet. Windrowed hay was scattered every which way. Mud squished between Joel's bare toes as he hurried along beside the road. He was glad to be going home to Mom, but he had enjoyed eating supper with the Yoder family. He whispered to himself as he turned in the Stutzman Lane, "That's what it would be like if we had a daddy." Chapter 14. Flood. The storm was by no means over. Less than an hour after Joel got home, more clouds came boiling up from the horizon. Soon the rain was falling in sheets again. "Harvey's hay is getting really soaked," observed Joel. He was sitting on the wood box, watching Mom and Elam eat their supper. A loud rumble of thunder filled the kitchen, startling them. "That sounded real close," Mom said. She went to the window, and after a moment sat down again. Joel could see she was nervous. He thought back to supper at the Yoder home. No one had seemed nervous. Joel thought to himself, "Mom probably wouldn't be nervous either if we had a daddy." The heavy shower lasted half an hour. When finally the thunder growled away into the distance, the sun was just about setting. It shone with a reddish glow from a band of clear sky appearing on the western horizon. "I wonder how the creek looks after all this rain," Elam exclaimed. Joel turned to Mom. "May we go out and have a look before we take our baths?" "Yes, you may, but be back soon, and stay out of the water. The current will be strong," Mom advised. The boys dashed out to the pasture. "Lady's not here!" exclaimed Joel. Elam laughed. "Don't worry, I took her indoors when I saw the storm coming." "Good," said Joel. He peered down the hill to the creek. "Just look at the water. It's spread way up over the field." Elam was staring, wide-eyed. "Oh, my, I've never seen it this high before. Hey, what about that cottage in the Stanfields Flats? It must be partly underwater." Elam began to run across the field to the fence that formed the boundary line between the Stutzmans and the Stanfields. When Joel reached the fence, Elam was pointing and shouting, "Look at that! The cottage is halfway underwater." "Was somebody living there?" Joel asked anxiously. Elam shook his head. "I doubt it. Sometimes the Stanfields let visitors sleep in the cottage, but nobody would have been asleep at this time of the day." "They must have furniture and beds in the cottage, then. The beds will be ruined," said Joel. Elam shrugged. "Not much we can do about it. I wouldn't venture into this flood just to rescue a bed." "Neither would I," agreed Joel. They stood for a few minutes longer, watching the water swirl and eddy near the roof of the cottage. Then they turned back toward the house. The next day after church, everyone was talking about the storm. The storm in their area had actually been mild. A hurricane had gone through some of the southern states and Central America. Flooding and high winds had caused a lot of damage. On the way home, Elam said, "Edwin says some of our boys might be going to Central America to help clean up after the flood." "That's good," commented Mom. "They will surely need help." "I wish I could go too," Elam said wistfully. Mom patted his arm. "I imagine that will be work for grown men and boys. But you know, if some of Harvey's boys go, you may be needed to help with their hay." Joel had another idea. And maybe we could help John Stanfield clean up his cottage." "Say, that would be something," exclaimed Elam. "Don't forget it's Sunday," Mom reminded them with a chuckle. "No cleaning up today." They didn't do any cleaning up that evening, but they did go down to the pasture for another look at their own little flood. "The water's going down fast," observed Joel. "See, the cottage is practically above water again." Elam marveled. "Look at all the mud, layers of it, everywhere. Do you think there is mud inside the cottage, too?" "Probably. What a mess that will be," responded Joel. The Stanfields' cottage was the first thing the boys thought of Monday morning. "Should we go over and offer to help clean up?" Elam wondered at breakfast. "John and his wife are pretty old for that kind of work." "Well, the peas are letting up," Mom considered. "There won't be much picking today. Besides, it's almost too muddy to work in the garden. You may go and offer to help." Soon after breakfast they were off. Joel lagged a few feet behind Elam as they went up the Stanfields' walk. He was glad to let his older brother do the talking. Greta Stanfield opened the door when Elam knocked. She was a snowy-haired, wrinkled-cheeked lady of about 70. "Hello! You are Mary's boys, aren't you?" "Yes, we saw that your cottage was flooded, and we thought we would offer to help clean it up," Elam said quickly. "My, that's nice of you," beamed Greta. "Our son phoned and offered to come up on Saturday to help, but it will be nice to start sooner. Wait, I'll ask John." She hurried off toward the barn, then stopped and looked back. "Come along if you like." Joel and Elam followed her. The Stanfields' barn was small, really only a hobby barn for the few cattle they kept. Suddenly Greta put a finger to her lips. "Shh! I see John is milking the goat. We better keep quiet till he's done. Nanny is new, and she's awfully skittish yet." Elam and Joel looked at one another. They hadn't known the Stanfields kept a goat. This was interesting. By peering over a partition, they could see John, as snowy-haired as his wife. On a little platform in front of him stood the goat. Nanny kept glancing around nervously while John milked her. "There, all done," John said. Nanny was off the platform in a single leap. The elderly man looked up in surprise. "I see we have visitors." "Yes, these boys came to offer their help in cleaning up the cottage," Greta said in a pleased smile. "Sounds good," said John with a smile. He handed the pail of goat's milk to Greta. "I was just going down there myself to have a look at the damage. I'll be glad to have you along." Even though he was nearly 70, John's strides were energetic. The boys had to hurry to keep up with him as he led the way down to the cottage. The door hung crazily from one hinge. "Current must have been pretty strong to do that," John commented. His boots squished in mud as he stepped inside. Mud was everywhere. It was caked on the chairs, on the table, on the cupboard, on the windowsills, and several inches deep on the floor. "See that?" asked John, pointing to a dirty line partway up the wall. "That shows how high the water went." He stood there, shaking his head. "This is a real mess. A real mess." Elam and Joel stood nearby without saying anything. They felt sorry for their elderly neighbor. But John wasted no time feeling sorry for himself. He turned to the boys and said with a chuckle, "What are we waiting for? I'm going up to get some shovels." Chapter 15. Cleanup. Cleaning up the cottage proved to be hard work. First, they had to move furniture outdoors. John's bad back didn't allow him to do heavy lifting, so he mostly gave instructions while the boys did the work. "I'm afraid these mattresses are ruined," John said, shaking his head. "We'll drag them outside, and when my son comes on Saturday, we'll haul them to the dump." Elam and Joel tugged and pulled until they had 3 soggy twin mattresses lying on the hillside. Next, John examined the couch. It was just as soggy as the mattresses.
"Another write-off, I guess. Do you think you can get this out, too?"
It's no heavier than the mattresses, Elam replied, grabbing one end. When they had it outdoors, Joel stood for a moment, looking at it. This couch might be all right again after it's dried out, he said hopefully. Elam wrinkled his nose. I doubt it. Even if it ever got dry, it would probably be smelly. I didn't mean for using in a house, Joel hastened to say. What then? Joel turned back to the cottage. Oh, just something. He had an idea, but he didn't want to tell Elam, not yet.
"Now, if we could get the table and chairs outside, too, we'd have more room to start cleaning up,"
John suggested. By the time all the movable furniture was outdoors, Joel felt as though he were covered with mud. Now the work began in earnest. He and Elam each had a pail and shovel. They scooped up mud from the floor and filled their pails. Then they carried the mud to the creek bank and dumped it. John helped a little with the shoveling, but he soon stopped, explaining,
"My wife and my doctor would get really anxious if they saw me doing this. Please don't feel you have to keep at it all morning, boys. Quit before you're totally exhausted."
The boys kept at it even though they were tired. Towards noon, John said,
"I hope you can stay for lunch. Greta will be happy to fix something."
We promised Mom we'd be home for dinner, Elam answered. There was a note of regret in his voice. It would have been interesting to have lunch with the Stanfields. Shall we come back this afternoon? Elam offered as he and Joel prepared to leave. John's eyes twinkled as they ran over the boys' muddy clothes.
"I have a feeling your mom will insist on a bath and clean clothes even before you eat. It would be too bad to come back and get dirty right away again. But if you really want to, we could tackle the mess again tomorrow."
Okay, Elam agreed readily. The hay won't be ready yet tomorrow. John had guessed right. Mom had already filled the tub with warm water when the boys got home. The first thing Joel noticed when they got back to the cottage the next morning was the smell. Phew, he said, holding his nose. It didn't smell this bad yesterday, did it? Elam shook his head. Reminds me of a garbage dump. Just then John Stanfield appeared at the door.
"That's a good description,"
he chuckled. Do you think we can get it to smell clean again? Joel wondered. John responded,
"I hope so. You know, I'm glad we're starting the cleanup before my son Trevor comes. He's a real city boy by this time, even though he grew up on the farm. I have a feeling if he saw and smelled the cottage today, he would want to bulldoze it down rather than clean it up."
Elam and Joel grinned at one another and set to work. By 11 o'clock they had scraped up all the mud from the 4 little rooms.
"Ready for a bath again?"
John asked as they left. Sure thing, replied Elam. Do you need help again tomorrow? Mom says there are beans to pick this afternoon.
"Well, if we could get started with hot water and soap, washing walls and things,"
John said hopefully. We'll come if Mom lets us, Elam assured him. Tramping up the hill, Joel exclaimed, My, it's good to get some fresh air. That smell is getting worse than a pig barn. Elam looked at him. Imagine how much worse the smell will be down in Central America, where whole cities were flooded. Paul and Joe Yoder will have some stories to tell when they get back, I guess, said Joel. Do you think the vanload of boys has reached the disaster area already? I doubt it. They only started off last evening. By the time they get there, the smell will be even worse because of the hot sun and all. Joel thought that over. And I don't suppose the workers down there get the chance to take a bath at noon the way we do. Elam shook his head. They will have to keep on all day, I'm sure. I just hope they can take a bath before they go to bed. On Wednesday morning, John's pickup truck stood near the cottage when the boys arrived.
"Hot water,"
said the old man with a smile, touching the barrel on the back of the truck.
"Gallons and gallons of hot water is what we need today. See, this barrel has a spigot at the bottom. Fill your bucket with hot water, add this soap, and you're ready to start at the high water mark."
Joel grinned. He liked his elderly neighbor's breezy manner. Soon he and Elam were scrubbing a wall. Elam could reach as high as the dirty water had gone, but Joel had to stand on a stool. "Whew, the water gets dirty real fast," Joel exclaimed after a few minutes.
"That's why I brought a whole barrel full,"
John said.
"Be sure to use it all up. As soon as the water in your bucket turns dark, get some more."
It seemed to Joel that he spent more time filling and emptying buckets than actually scrubbing, but by noon they had cleaned up several walls. John was pleased with their progress.
"I'm going to pay you well,"
he promised. "Pay?" asked Elam in surprise as he emptied his final bucket.
"Yes, indeed. You will need pay for such dirty work,"
John insisted. Elam shrugged. "We hadn't been thinking about pay. Well, I'll ask my mother." The boys spent every morning that week at the cottage. Both haymaking and bean-picking were best done in the afternoons anyway. By Friday noon they were still not finished, but the cottage definitely looked better.
"Trevor and I can finish up tomorrow,"
John said with satisfaction. He reached into his pocket.
"And now for your pay."
Elam protested. This was volunteer work, just like the boys who went down to Central America to help clean up. Mom said we don't need pay. John smiled.
"All right, I won't pay you then. I'll just give each of you a gift."
And he pressed a $20 bill into each boy's hand. Joel's eyes widened. $20! He'd never had so much money in his life. He looked at Elam to see what he would do. Elam hesitated. "Well, okay. Thanks a lot. We enjoyed working for you." "Yes, thank you very much," Joel said shyly.
"And thank you very much,"
John responded heartily. He waved as the boys set off up the hill. "What do you think Mom will say?" Joel asked, gazing at his $20 bill. "I don't know," Elam replied. "She said we don't need pay." Joel ran into the kitchen. "Mom, John didn't pay us, but he gave us each a gift." He waved the $20 bill under her nose. Mom blinked. $20 each. "He insisted," Elam said quickly. "He wouldn't take no for an answer." "I see," said Mom. "Well, I guess you couldn't very well refuse." Joel felt relieved. He had been afraid Mom would make them take the money back. "What are we going to do with it?" he asked. It's your money. You earned it," Mom answered. "I don't even know what to do with so much money," Elam declared. "Shall I put it in a safe place for now? We could all think it over for a day or two," Mom suggested.